Hello, guys. Hello. Welcome to the F1 podcast by Sports 101. And if Friday is anything to go by, the Chinese Grand Prix weekend might just have flipped the competitive order in Formula One. So, what are we excited for? Because this is going to be chaos in Shanghai. There was only one practice session before the sprint qualifying. So, it was utter chaos. Ferrari brought in the Macarena wing and they decided not to use it. Mercedes is still dominating when we were not expecting them to dominate. Red Bull are struggling. VCAP almost had them. And at the same time, we have a new fight. We had Antonelli versus Russell today. So we have a lot of interesting things to talk about. So, Harshal, what do you say? How interesting do you think the Grand Prix weekend is gonna be? Especially saying that we need to wake up at 8:30 tomorrow. Sorry, 8 o'clock tomorrow to watch the sprint race.
Um, I will wake up, but I'm just wondering if I should be changing my team because I've just seen Mercedes illegal pace, Russell Antonelli again, Mercedes at the front stops, P1, P2 again for the qualifiers, sprint one, and I think it will be replicating same for the main race as well. So I'm actually confused if I should go for Mercedes this time. Deep, should I go for Mercedes?
Yeah, like in my fantasy team, Mercedes is there, but I won't be picking George because he's the nemesis of my hero, Max. But yeah, I do think Mercedes will be very dominant in China as well, but unless Ferrari just brings up something new, they are not going to be defeated soon.
See, we
Uh,
need to understand one thing over here. It
Shri,
is
you mentioned the fight in the intro. Whose fight did you talk about with Antonelli?
Norris.
What was the fight about?
Norris almost brake tested. Sorry, Antonelli almost brake tested Norris when the qualifying was on, which and in qualifying, just when Norris was going to start his push lap in SQ2, and it was at that point that Antonelli came out of the pits. And we are not actually sure whether Russell was starting a hot lap at that time, but then just for the sake of it, Russell Norris was like, just going to start my push lap, and he came and impeded me. He should be investigated for impeding. And they actually reported Antonelli. I mean, Norris is, as Deepan said, Norris is the rival to Antonelli and Russell right now, and they are using anything and everything in the book to try and beat Mercedes dominance.
Talking about
Yeah,
Mercedes
like
dominance, I've watched just on Instagram. I've watched a Sky Sports post. Russell talking about something.
हिपोक्रेसी की भी सीमा होती है हिपोक्रेसी की भी सीमा होती है ये
This
लोग
is it.
these people Russell was saying about the start procedure and mechanism and how some teams, when we know exactly what he meant by some teams, are against them trying to change the start procedure because some teams the start procedure is an advantage. I mean, come on, Russell, then you need to change your engine. If you want to change the start procedure, then you need to change the engine. Come on, guys, come on. Hypocrisy, there is a limit to hypocrisy.
well,
Didn't
what
he get a
he
did he
basically
get P1?
Exactly my point. See, the thing is, if the compression ratio is an advantage for Mercedes, which half of the grid is having, and there is just two teams who have mastered the small turbo, which gives them a rocket ship at the start. I mean, come on, Russell. You cannot say that they are not. They are saying no just because their advantage will go away.
I mean
Deep,
the
what do
bigger
you think about
turbo
Russell's comment?
like So the bigger turbo, just technically speaking, I think they have posted it, Sky Sports guys. So the bigger turbo basically helps them gain more speed. So by removing the start procedure, what you call
No,
that?
they
The choke, which is the start procedure for Mercedes. You are basically creating a Mercedes dominance of 2014, maybe a Red Bull RB19 dominance kind of a era, and
no, it's
that
not.
is not going to be very
See, people,
helpful in the longer run.
deep. See, the basic thing is the start procedure is gonna be difficult because there is no MGU-H. There is no heat generation due to which the turbo reacts quickly. The turbo
Yeah.
is taking time because the size of the turbo engine. I mean, I'm not an engineer. You are an engineer and you need to research this more.
Um,
But the turbo
so
engine,
what I know from what I asked my mechanical friends are, so the bigger the turbo is, you have to rotate it, right? So let's say you have something which is this size, right? You have to make it spin more, and you have to add more power to it compared to something which is this small. You have to just like do this, right? And what happens is during the start procedure, the smaller turbos they are spinning faster, and that's why what turbo basically does is it pushes air more. Uh, from what I know, it pushes air more. It moves the crankshaft faster, and if the turbo is taking more time to spin, that means the engine is not fully at the capacity in, let's say, 1 second compared to the 10th second, right? That's it. So by removing that choke of a faster start procedure, you are basically giving the bigger turbos a better chance at catching up in a start, right? In the start. So what happens is the ऑस्ट्रेलिया का टर्न 1 वाला चीज इधर रिपीट हो नहीं सकता अगर स्टार्ट प्रोसीजर बहुत लंबा होगा.
because see, when it came to Australia, the cars are not having a huge turn wherein they need to reduce speed. They have a quick
Yeah.
turn and then you have a kind of longish 700 meters straight. I mean, it's just something like this, wherein the
Yeah.
car will move from here to here, sorry, here to here with a slight curve. But Shanghai, it is a total rotation. So if it is like this is the start. It goes in here. It's something somewhat like this.
It's a very technical turn. It's
It's
very
like this. It's like
uh,
this. If you look at my
it's
headphones,
like
what I've done.
That's
yeah.
good
It's
usage of earphones, all right, Sri.
so when the car is moving from here, it tends to reduce speed. So that faster turbo will not get an advantage. And even before the 1.2 kilometer straight, I mean, this is my observation from watching FP1 today. And even before the long 1.2 kilometer straight, you have a similar curve wherein your turbo will not be able to give you enough battery power. So you are definitely bound
So
to lose.
turbo is I don't think it is helping with the
No,
battery power.
no, but
Turbo is basically helping with the engine spinning faster. That's it.
so
Nothing
when
more.
the engine spins faster and when
Yeah.
they brake, the engine regeneration is what is giving the battery
Yeah.
a recharge. And you need to recharge well. I mean, if you look at even the previous Grand Prix, the Australian Grand Prix,
Yeah.
Mercedes was using the space before turn 9 because after turn 9, you have that longest straight where they were deploying maximum energy. So
Yeah.
even here today, before in the first two sectors at the end of SQ2, when Mercedes and Ferrari and Max did their second runs, Mercedes was using the first two sectors to generate enough battery so that they can deploy more on the 1.2 kilometer long straight. So,
Yeah.
I mean, again, this is a very technical track. And that is why Ferrari decided to, coming to the main part, it was a party song. And don't tell my wife, but my ex used to love the remix of this song, which was I know I have murdered the lyrics. Macarena, the Macarena wing, the Macarena wing, which
US
before.
government का official song.
So basically, Ferrari decided to bring their Macarena wing, which they tested in Bahrain on Hamilton's car. And see,
I
it
think
was
Leclerc
given
also
these.
had it, right?
Today, they Leclerc had it, but during testing, it was only Hamilton who tested it out.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
today, when both of them were testing it out, one big thing is at the end of the long straight and at the end of the start-finish straight, wherein the straight line mode of Ferrari actually flips the wing 360 degrees, right?
Yep.
So when it is closing, that is where Hamilton during practice had his spin, where the rears locked up. Because one major fault that I detected over here is when it is coming to stop to the breaking point, it is possible that when the wing is moving, the air which is flowing over here, which is going from up, is being pushed down. Okay, it is being pushed down in such a way that it is hindering the drag coefficient of the car, and that is where I think Ferrari decided to not use it in Shanghai, because end of the day, you know, it probably would be more suited for Monza, wherein it's in as another somewhere I heard Monza, basically Italian tracks, okay, not just Monza. You have even
Monza and maybe Baku.
Imola. Imola and Monza have these characteristics wherein they are just straight lines with curves at both the ends and just chicanes. It's just chicanes and chicanes. If you start, it's very anti-Ascari. Then you have a lot of chicanes in Imola and Monza and Mugello.
Ferrari did get a P3, P4 here, right?
No, Ferrari got P4 and P6.
Is that better than the Aussie one?
No, it's not technically, but does it matter? Because we did see that Hamilton came racing from P7 and Charles came racing from P4, and they were P1 and P3 at the end of the turn one. So we can expect that again over here. And even without the new wing, we know for a fact that Ferrari are still in the fight. For sure, for sure.
Ferrari also had a thing in their halo, right? A wing kind of a structure.
That they have been having for a long time. Many of the Formula One cars have the kind of
Not exactly
you,
that.
Harsh, I don't know if you remember a cartoon called Samurai Jack. It was an old cartoon by the same creator of Dexter's Lab,
I'm not
wherein
that old.
the wherein
I'm
the
not that too
villain
old.
wherein the villain had the horns in the exact way that Ferrari has uh, the things on top of the T cam. This is what you're talking about, right? This is how it looked, right, Deepan?
I'm 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 not talking about that. No. I'm talking about this. Let me share it.
Okay.
You see this thing. Are you guys able to see it?
We are.
Yes. Ferrari added a new
This thing.
deflector to the Halo central pylon.
I
Okay.
think it is. I think it is just something to make the wind deflect a bit away from the eyes of the driver, probably. I mean, this won't have much of a aerodynamic effect on the car.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're.
But then we are discussing all this. But we are
But
forgetting
what
the
is happening with like Ferrari? They are innovating
See,
a lot
Ferrari
aerodynamically
is
this time. Like
the Ferrari
last
is doing
regulation was more
Ferrari.
focused on aerodynamics, right?
Look, Ferrari is doing Ferrari because, see, not just Ferrari, everyone is doing something or the other to try and get things straight. And we are only able to focus on Ferrari and Mercedes because these are the only two other than Audi, other than Audi, Ferrari and Mercedes are the only two teams which are actually the complete constructors. I mean, even Red
Okay.
Bull, for all we say that Red Bull is using Red Bull powertrains, it is a Ford engine. It is a Ford engine which they have had to get it into the car in the right way. Even McLaren has to adapt the Mercedes engine into their car. Even Aston Martin has to adapt. I'm so I'm I'm sorry. I just had to bring Aston Martin, who is not able to adapt to any.
I mean, it was just one race. Okay, talking about since it was just one race. Uh, Considering Mercedes can, go ahead with this form for the whole season, who are your P2 or second position for constructions? Is it Ferrari or is it McLaren for you guys?
P2 for the constructors is going to be Mercedes.
Or Deep?
Yeah, it should be Ferrari.
We are forgetting one thing.
What
We have
delusion?
not a delusion. It's just that I do not see Kimi to be very consistent in bringing in P2. I mean, I mean, we will have going through the development phase, we would have Ferrari, actually both Hamilton and Charles, along with George and Kimi, are very strong over here. But then this is just Kimi's second season, and the more he starts to perform, it will be interesting to see how he copes with the pressure because they
You do remember he was 6 points off, like back of Hamilton, right? Last
see.
season,
That's
six
exactly what
points.
I'm saying. 6 points off, 6 points off. But if you also notice, a lot of his performances have started from the back. He was not a consistent qualifier.
Yeah,
He's
He's
young.
still he's young. He's young. That is we are forgetting the fact that he's young. I mean, even for everyone who's comparing him to Max, Max also was not very consistent in performing and scoring points till 2021 or sorry till 2020. He was there. He was a tough racer. He was a hard racer, yes. But most of his race starts in till 2020 have come from out of the top five or top six.
Sorry to bring that up since you have mentioned Max. Their both bromance is called Mimi.
What?
Mimi, yeah. M-I. Mimi.
Max and
Imika,
Kimi.
Imi, and
Mami, man, not Mimi. Mami. M-A-M-I.
no, it's Mimi. No,
Huh?
they have posted Mimi,
Kimi,
Red Bull,
Mimi.
and
Yes, Kimi, it's Mimi.
What's with
Kimi
the connection?
Kimi
It's
का
like,
K हटा के
It's
M
just
लगा
Gen
I
दिया.
Z
mean,
thing. It's just Gen Z
I
thing.
mean,
It trends.
you're talking about this. Let me tell you something. Some people were actually talking about Max Verstappen.com coming into racing as the 13th team, sorry, as the 12th team on the grid when Max retires.
BYD is coming as 12th team now.
Huh?
They,
BYD.
they are going to make this Formula
Mahindra,
E.
Mahindra, 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 Mahindra. Okay, but
Mean,
now that
yeah.
Harshal, now that you got up Mimi, we need to actually talk about the shock that Red Bull was at the brink of being ousted
Yeah,
from SQ3
exactly.
by VCAB. I mean, it is Arvid and Liam who are actually challenging Max and Hedger. I think VCAB has just gone. Once Horner and Helmut left, when Marco Baba left, I guess VCARB has gone fully into I don't give a damn. I am racing Max. I don't care who Max is. We are showing up. We are going to be better than Red Bull on a given day.
We got a mini F1 between these four drivers.
Yeah.
I mean, to bringing back my history lessons in 2008, the first Red Bull victory was not Red Bull. It was Toro Rosso,
Yeah,
and it was Toro Rosso, and it was Sebastian Vettel at Monza.
Oh, and who were the Red
Yes.
Bull drivers at that time?
The Red Bull drivers were Mark Webber and David Coulthard.
Oh, and during that time, Mark Webber had won F1, right?
No, no. Mark
The next season?
Webber, it was the next season when Vettel came in. I mean, 2008 was also the last season for David Coulthard as a Formula One driver before he transitioned into this great F1 pundit that F1 TV has. I mean, DC, DC, DC.
coolest for me.
But come on, guys, you are Red Bull fans. Both of you are Red Bull guys. Both of you are Max guys. So tell me, what do you say about what is wrong with Red Bull? Verstappen
And
I'm
only
I
sorry,
V8.
guys. I'm not a Red Bull fan. I'm just a water fan. All right. Okay. Talking about being Red Bull fan, I know Deep is Red Bull fan. I want to know from Deep.
yeah,
Deep,
like
do you think, since I'd ask you if
I
who
do
might be the
believe in
contenders for P2?
I I I I think it will be Ferrari. I don't think it will be
Exactly. Do you think the Red Bull is
Red
tricky
Bull.
this time?
Red
While I
Bull,
do
the
believe in
car.
while I do believe in Laurent, but the thing is, I don't think they have made a very good engine as of right now. The development is still going on, so maybe in the later half of the season they might uh, do the wonders they were hoping to do last season.
I mean,
And
we can clearly see that the car is struggling with long
yeah,
corners and straight line efficiency. Max himself has come out and said, "Okay, guys, the car
Max ka
is."
वही Yeah. So Max's strength is the cornering, right? So his car last season was like the slowest, one of the slowest in straight, but his cornering was so good and so perfect
So
that
Deep, so guys,
he
do you think that this
was
is just?
contending.
I mean, do you think this is just a track specific weakness? Because if you notice, even though his qualifying went wrong in Melbourne, he still did come up to P6 from P20. So is could this be just a track specific weakness, or do you think the car itself is having something fundamentally wrong with it? Because
I
I
I don't
hear
think
think it's. I think there is some issue with the car, but it could be mainly setup. It could, because in Qatar last year, you did see he struggled in the sprint, and in
hmm,
race he was doing way better. I think it could be repeated over here. Who knows?
I
We have
think
to see.
he has just got too polite with his life, and since he has won a lot, I mean domination since
guys, guys,
2021.
guys, 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 guys. Please, please, I'm talking about Red Bull. Red Bull has Isaac Hadjar as well. It's not just Max anymore. Come on, guys. Come on. It was P3 Isaac Hadjar in the Australian GP qualifying. Why are we
I
just
mean,
saying Max? Why are we just saying Max? Just let's talk about the car.
Shri, you never know. After 4 races, you might have Liam in the second car for Red Bull. You never know. It's
I
too
don't
early to
think.
talk about
I mean,
second
I
drivers for
don't
Red
think.
Bull.
I don't think it's gonna happen anytime soon because the person who
The
was the
management, yeah,
not
the
management.
management is better
Exactly.
comparatively. It's
And
not
Lauren Mekis
toxic.
is a and Lauren Mekis is a weak up guy, so he understands what happens when people get thrown from Red Bull to weak up. So I don't think
You
he's gonna do
do,
that.
you do know he was in Ferrari before, right?
Exactly, they are not gonna drop drivers just because they had a few bad races. But
Hey,
coming to
what do you guys think about Williams? I mean, they struggled too much. I mean, it's just
So
getting
what
worse and worse.
I
again, it's just the engine and the car coming together because we know the engine works. We know the engine is good.
Because of being Mercedes.
Yeah,
yeah,
I
simple.
mean,
I mean,
Mercedes, all
it can
teams
be
have
drivers
this.
who are struggling as well. I mean, both the drivers.
See, it is the same thing which even McLaren is going through, right? Even McLaren, the drivers are struggling. The car is having a Mercedes engine. You have Alpine, where Gasly is doing well, but Colapinto is having spins.
Exactly. I was shocked to see was Gasly in Q1. Not right?
Gasly outqualified Verstappen
Did
in a
he?
French. Yeah,
Damn. It's just getting blows worse for Colapinto. Is it Colapinto penalty? Was it? What is it called?
Colapinto and
Colapinto
Go
and go.
Penalto.
Next time it will be Kimpinding penalty or something like that.
All right.
But the thing is, yeah,
What does this
let's go.
Shanghai track tells us about the cars? I mean, has Mercedes just nailed their strategy?
Mercedes has. I mean, strategy. It's too early to talk about strategy. It's too early to talk about whether Mercedes has nailed the strategy because anything can happen. I mean, Mercedes could be Mercedes could just have crossed the entry to the pit straight when Liam Lawson has banged into Perez, and because of which there is a safety car which has come out, and Ferrari takes advantage of the same. So we can't talk about the strategy. And I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Perez will not be participating in the remainder of the sprint race.
Why?
I mean, there is some issue with the car, and Perez did not even get on track for qualifying. So they are,
Just
I
Perez
think,
or both the
withdrawn.
drivers? Even
No,
Bottas?
just Perez
Just
as
Perez.
of now. Bottas is
Should
still
I
there.
should I remove Bottas from my lineup?
I mean,
You should.
you should. You should. I mean, clearly Aston Martin may probably end up placing higher than Cadillac in the sprint at least.
I mean, Cadillac, you don't have expectation much, right? Like they are
Because
a very new team. Like they're,
Bro, they gave me negative points.
yeah, they will. They will.
I mean, zero is better than them.
let me be very honest with you, Cadillac have come out with press releases that the first 3 to 4 races, they don't even expect to complete the race, even forget placing in the race. They are going to be racing. Of course, they are going to be getting data. They never have had on-road data from any of their cars. But again, they are having a Ferrari engine, so they do have the small turbo. They would have a good start, but other than that, I don't know whether they are confident that the car can finish the race.
And it's also about the conservation of engines and spare parts, right? They don't want to utilize it and just so they can finish it. Like better
Yeah,
not finish it and just keep on working on or just test
I
your
thought I missed it,
things.
but did Oliver got into Q1?
Yeah,
yeah,
SQ3. Like he's a good driver.
Yeah, he's on 9. Yeah, he qualified at number 9. Yeah.
who?
Are we
Huh.
Oliver?
Oliver
Yeah.
Behrman.
He finished ahead of
Bearman.
Isaac.
Yeah, yeah,
Isn't that something? Or
exactly.
He's a
See,
good
that's
driver. He he's a
plus that's
very good
exact.
driver. Like
See, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. Mercedes is team number one, but in the championship standings, whatever Mercedes, Ferrari top two. You have McLaren in P3. Essentially, it's VCARB in P4 and Red Bull in P5. If you
damn, P5.
that's
Deep.
that's
Deep.
exactly what is
That's too
happening.
deep. P5, man.
it's
Deep.
it's 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 not gonna
Thank your
happen. I
stars.
don't think they will.
Thank your
I
stars
mean, Red
that
Bull will
there are
blow up their
11 teams.
engine from remotely. Arvind will get kidnapped.
So I have a very controversial question over here. Is this the first race weekend where Red Bull might genuinely be the fifth fastest car?
Yeah, it
Deep, you
might
should be
be.
answering
It,
this.
it should be, in my opinion. Like, if Alpine is doing so well, Gasly is a very good driver. I mean, Colapinto, I don't know. I haven't seen him race much. But I do think Alpine will be faster than Red Bull. Like, from what I saw, like during the qualifying, so I woke up around the SQ two times, so pretty late. But then what I saw is Alpine was doing better than Red Bull. Like they had a better pace, so yeah, they will
Uh,
probably score more.
Guys, do you think any driver is gonna get sick this weekend due to Chinese food?
Bye. Let's not discuss this.
Uh,
Let's not
they
discuss this.
they have their own chef, so yeah, not possible.
I mean, they're still in China, right?
But the food they prepare is like with their own chef and they have their own diet.
When in China, eat Chinese. Okay. uh, P7's Gasly finished ahead of Verstappen. And I think that's it. Tell me, what are your expectations from sprint race tomorrow?
Hmm.
George P1, Kimi P2, Hamilton P3.
I I asked you about sprint race, not qualifying.
Sprint race
He's,
and
he's talking about a sprint
sprint
race, not the qualifying. No, no,
sprint
no, no,
में
no, no, no,
podium
no.
होता है.
He's but then, my predictions is gonna be Hamilton P1, George P2, Charles P3, uh, and Kimi P4, Norris P5.
Hey, do you guys think
The-
Kimi is gonna get Oscar Piastri treatment this season? If they are, cut to cut.
He will be Lando Norris.
Come on, guys. I don't
He,
think Toto is gonna do this to Kimi. This is
he
not
will
gonna
get
happen. Kimi
he will
will
get
be.
Lando Norris treatment because have you seen them interact?
Come on,
I'm
George. Give the way to Kimi. He is requiring to
George.
come fast because he needs to have some bumper nickel bread.
Okay, I have one more question.
Okay.
If Ferrari had kept that Macarena wing on the car, could they have challenged Mercedes for pole, or was it never race ready in the first place?
Was never race ready. I don't think
Not
they
for
will
this
roll it
race.
out
Not for this
before.
race.
I don't think they will roll it out before the summer break. I don't think.
Monza
Do you think they're gonna roll it next season?
is
Is this
Baku
practice
before
season
or
for
No,
them?
no, is Baku before or after summer break?
after Monza,
After
after
Monza.
summer
So
break.
post summer break. They are gonna bring it out in probably Silverstone. Probably because I know Lewis is gonna use that to win his home Grand Prix.
So to compete P3, P4?
No, I mean I don't care about where they're gonna qualify. I don't care. I really don't. I know that they may not qualify P1, P2. I'm okay with them qualifying even P9, P10 for all that cares. Because their starts, I am just so in love with the starts. Because if they get the strategy right, the start is what is gonna give them
Ju-
the boost that is required. They just have to get the strategy right.
Shrivat's one doubt. We don't
Okay.
have any pit stops in sprint, right?
Not
Or
necessarily.
do we?
I
Not
mean, they can do one stop, right?
It's not
I
mandatory,
mean,
right?
I
it's
mean,
not
since there are
mandatory.
limited laps.
It's not mandatory. It's not definitely mandatory. So I mean, they can start on the hard
Got
tires,
it, got
and
it.
because see, they have used at least all teams have used at least two sets of mediums because SQ1 and SQ2 was compulsorily mediums. So they can probably use the medium tires. Okay, but I would feel that they would use a fresh set of hards because whoever has used the mediums to the most, they would be at a disadvantage. So hards, I believe, are the way to go.
Yeah, like sprint is good and all, but main points in GP only.
Do you guys think there will be a crash? Since I mean, nobody should risking since it's just sprint race, not the main race. Do you think there
There
would be a
could be.
crash?
There could be.
Deep?
Not so sure. But yeah, like some statistic wise, like it is one of the most crash prone race. So who knows?
Imagine Max just says and just crashes.
He training for Markaida.
See, let me tell you one thing. Almost everyone is going to start on the hards, is what I feel. If not hards, it's the mediums. Unless that is only and if only they have a new set of mediums. If they do not, I expect them to start on the hards because it is the safest for 19 laps. Yes, it will take time for it is going to take time for them to heat up the tires. But looking at the amount of right turns that this track is having, especially long right turns, it is gonna go on degrading the right hand tires. And also the long straight is actually banked a bit. If you look at my hand, it's a bit banked. So again, it's giving load onto the right wheels, especially the right fronts when it comes to the hard braking zone at the end of the straight. So I would love to see hard tires, of course. Hard tires, people will call me a Ferrari strategician because nobody is gonna go hard on 19 laps. But we need to also think about the amount of degradation that the medium tire is gonna have because I don't think anyone has a set of medium fresh tires.
Who are your podium finishers for sprint race?
For me, it's gonna be Lewis, George, and Charles. That's my podium,
Oh, you're going with both the Ferraris.
of course, because of the start
George,
and
Kimi, Luis.
I'm gonna go
I
with both the Mercedes. I think I'll go with Norris as well.
so for you, Ferrari is not on the podium.
Not for sprint. I'll be going for main race.
Mhm. See, this is why I said that. This is exactly why I said that Mercedes may have the best car, but in the championship, when it goes to Abu Dhabi, it would be Ferrari that may come out on top because main race may the main race Mercedes may get P1 and P2, but these are the small things where Ferrari will chip away at the points because Ferrari are not gonna leave. It's gonna be Mercedes and Ferrari top four most of the races unless someone crashes out or has the engine failure. And trust me, these two engines are not having reliability issues till now. It is Red Bull and it's Red Bull and Honda which are having reliability issues. Mercedes and Ferrari definitely do not.
All right, folks. You still got 9 hours to lock your team in F1 Fantasy and also do play F1 predictions. Guys, Shresh did not join because he felt that he'll go in negative points this weekend. He told me about that. It's okay, Shresh. Uh, Om told me he's feeling sad that he finished ahead of me in the F1 Fantasy, and that is why he did not join. That's okay, Om. All right, folks. If
Um,
you guys
I don't know why, but it's showing there are 5 teams in our league already. I think Shreyas has joined the league, but uh, after the current race because he wasn't part of the race in the last league. But let's look at the current standings in our league. P1, we have Dipanjan Ghosh with
wait for
Team
that.
B. We
Shri,
are
wait for that. I
169.
think things gonna change since sprint qualifier doesn't make any. There's no score points for sprint quali, so it's still the
Exactly.
same.
So this is just a reminder that I'm giving to all of us where
No,
we
you can
stand
just
in the
say I
league.
am leading the fantasy league. That's
From
okay.
the back, from the back. You're leading from the back.
I mean that's okay. We can just close on that. Guys, I'm leading the F1 fantasy, even the prediction league as well.
Okay. So coming at the end of the podcast, we have our predictions and our fantasy teams locked in. And we have already predicted our sprint winners. And guys, if Friday's pace is real, Mercedes might finally be back at the front of Formula One. But Shanghai is full of surprises. Last year, the only win which Ferrari had was Lewis Hamilton at Shanghai Sprint. So anything can happen. And let's watch out. Let's see what's going to happen tomorrow. And like, share, and subscribe so you will be aware when we upload a new podcast because, guys, we are going to be doing this every race weekend. So, bye
I
bye.
mean, every qualifier, sprint, every main race, watch it. Sports 101, F1 segment. Bye bye.